Welcome to the Nerdstalgic Podcast with your host, the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm.
It's Christmas! Sorry about that, folks. As you can tell, I'm in a very happy mood, a very Christmassy sort of mood. It's Christmas. I love it. It's my favourite time of the year. And as it's being my favourite time of the year, I'm going to talk about something that is one of also a very Christmassy sort of topic, but also one of my favourite things in the world, one of my favourite series in books, movies. And it's the Chronicles of Narnia. But before I get to that, I haven't done the introduction. Where am I? Sorry, I'm got really, really excited. I forgot about the introduction. I am Luke, your host of the Nerdstalgic Podcast. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're all good. Yeah, I'm talking about Chronicles of Narnia all this month, really, and it's going to be an absolute joy. I can't wait to take you guys on the journey with me. But before we get into all that, I've got to do some a bit of business first. So thank you to Order Books for sponsoring this episode, sponsoring this show. Within doing so, they've given me a promo code to get you 10% off any and all purchases on their checkout using the code NERDY10. That's NERDY, all higher case 10 at checkout to save you 10% off. Listen, it's a cost of living crisis at the moment, especially here in the UK. A lot of people are struggling. Things are getting more expensive. Save yourself some money. When it comes to spending for gifts for people, if you've got somebody in your life who loves video games or who loves vinyl or who loves books, go to Order Books. Check out their deals. They've always got deals on. You're saving books from landfill and you're saving money at the same time. So use my code NERDY10 at checkout. Save yourself some money this holiday season and help yourself out, and just help the environment out. So it's a win-lose. So it's a win-win. So you save money and the environment gets saved at the same time. All right, sounds like a good plan to me. Also, if you're not yet, please do follow me on Twitter at nerdstalgic _pod on Twitter. And if you listen to this on YouTube and you haven't done so yet, or if you're not listening to this on YouTube and haven't done so yet, please do follow me on YouTube. I'm currently at 52 subscribers as of recording this, which is pretty good considering all I do is talk to myself. I don't do any videos, so 52 subscribers is pretty impressive. But I'm hoping to get to 55 to 60, hopefully before the end of this month, the end of the year. We will see if I can actually do that. Fingers crossed. But yeah, so make sure you subscribe to me and like, follow, and share and all that jazz on YouTube. And yeah, that is all the business side done. So today we're going to be talking about the Chronicles of Narnia books. There's about 7 books in the series. Don't worry, this ain't going to be a very, very long episode. I do promise you that. I know I'm going to be talking about 7 books here. I know I always say it ain't going to be a long one, and it does end up being, over an hour. I do apologize for that. But I just tend to talk, and especially when there's something I really love and I'm passionate about. I will talk about it for ages. I just hope that it's what I'm saying is actually decent. I'm not actually just, blabbing. I'm not just waffling on. But before we get on to the books, I just do want a quick thing to say, give you a bit of a story time about my love of the Chronicles of Narnia books. I love these. I didn't read them really till, quite late in life. I'll say late in life. Makes it sound like I'm a really old man. Late in life for me up until this point. You go, that sounds better. I think it was a year or two ago over lockdown that I actually had this box set, and it was for ages. A friend of mine bought it me, and it was just sat there collecting dust because I am an avid reader. I've read 800 plus books. I've always got a book going on. If it's not an audio book, I'm reading a physical book, or I'm reading an ebook on my phone. I'm always reading something. I just love to read. So these sat on my shelf for a very, very long time. But I grew up with the movies. I watched The Lion, Went to the Wardrobe, blown away, absolutely enraptured with this world. I watched Prince Caspian, again, enraptured, loved it. By the time we got to The Voyage of the Dawn Trader, I still loved it. But as the characters in that film, what tends to happen with Narnia is the fact that you tend to grow up, and when you grow up, you get to the age. If you watch Bedknobs and Broomsticks, you'd be quite familiar with this quote. But it's the age of not believing that everybody gets to a certain age in their life where you stop believing in Santa, even though Santa does exist, and I know he exists. I've seen him. You stop believing in fairies. You stop believing in the tooth fairy. You stop believing in dragons and in you know really fanciful, amazing, wonderful things. You stop believing in it, and you don't even know you're doing it. You just one day you wake up and you no longer believe in these things, and it's a shame. It's an absolute crying shame, but that's kind of what happens. That's the whole point of growing up, and that's the kind of idea of Narnia, is the fact of even though you've been there, you've met Aslan, you've experienced it, you've lived, you've gone on adventures. It's still the fact of your time's ended. You've grown up now. It's time to move on. It's time to go on the next adventure, the adventure of being an adult. Narnia is for the young, which it isn't really. If you read the books, are written for, if you could say they're written for children, but the same stage is that all people of all ages can enjoy this world. I do. At 24, I still love this world. I surround myself by readers, and when you surround yourself by readers, you always tend to have the same sort of conversations, and the one sort of conversation that comes up all the time is the fact of, if you could go to all the books you've read, if you could go to any world for a day or a week, or you'd have to stay there forever, you'd have to leave this world and live there for the rest of your life, where would you go? And a lot of people say, the common things. People want to go to space, people want to go to Lord of the Rings, to Middle Earth, which I'd like to go there as well. Or people want to go like 20,000 leagues into the sea with Captain Nemo, explore Atlantis, explore the deep oceans. There's many places that people come up with. But for me, of all the books I've read, again, I've read 800 plus books. I'm close to 900, right? Of all the books I've read, I always come back to Narnia. I don't even think about it. Whenever that question is asked, straight away I just say Narnia. Narnia at Christmas. Narnia, the Lion and the Witch of the Wardrobe, minus the White Witch. I don't want the White Witch to be there when I'm there, because I'm a child of Adam, and I'm on a hit list and she'll try to kill me. So I don't want to be there when she's there. But I'd like to go to Narnia at Christmas. I'd like to go see the lamp surrounded by snow and meet Mr. Tumnus. And I'd like to go meet Prince Caspian and go on adventures in the Dawn Trader. And I'd like to meet the horse and his boy and the talking horse. And there's so many things that I'd like to do. I'd like to visit the wood between the worlds and see all the other different dimensions. Like, this series goes a lot deeper than what people think, and that one of my not just my loves of this world, but also what I'm going to try and do my best in this episode and the rest of this month is try to convey to you, because I know majority of the people that listen to this are adults, right? Some of you are readers, some of you are not. But my main goal of this is to try to make you understand that the Chronicles of Narnia, it's not for kids. It goes a lot deeper. And the only reason it feels like it's for kids is because most people's interpretations of what Chronicles of Narnia is the Disneyfied version of Narnia. It's the Disney version of The Lion, Witch of the Wardrobe, or the Prince Caspian, or the Dawn Trader. When actually they've completely missed out, the dimensions, the dimension hopping of the Magician's Nephew, the really close connection between the horse and the boy, the silver chair, the last battle, the silver chair where Prince Caspian is now an adult and he gets kidnapped by, I think he gets kidnapped like a giant or like a goblin, and then he's underground. And then you got the last battle, which is complete trash. But even again, to be honest, that the last book was terrible. But again, we'll get there eventually. But again, my main point is to kind of convey that this series is as deep as Lord of the Rings. This series is as deep as more deep than what Disney made it out to be, right? And that's going to be my main goal, not just with this episode, but with the coming episodes. Even though I'm going to be reviewing the movies as well, which are Disneyfied, I'm going to try and sort of tell you the ins and outs and kind of my experience of reading the books and so on and so forth. So that's my main plan there. But we'll get to the movies and so when we get there. But for now, we're going to be talking about the books. Now, the way this is going to go is that I'm going to talk about each book individually. I'm not going to spend ages on it, because I could do an episode by episode on each book, but there's 7 books in this series, and sadly there's not 7 weeks in December, right? So I haven't got time to do that. So I want to get this all done within Christmas time, because obviously Narnia, it's a very Christmassy sort of topic. Also, the fact of that gives me time then in January to take some time off for myself a little bit, to kind of get things ready, but also kind of write my book that I'm writing, which I've sadly neglected for a long time. and then come back whenever my anniversary is, and then start season 2, and we'll go from there. But that's in the future. That's not now. For now, the idea is that I'm going to talk about each book individually. I'm going to give you a rough description of the blurb and kind of tell you my experience with them. And I'm going to read you a passage from each book of my favourite passages. And yeah, that's just how it's going to work. So hopefully you'll be interested in, from my introduction, hopefully you'll be interested in joining me on this venture, joining me on this journey. It's going to be a really fun one. So yeah, I think it's about time that I would shut up now. And let's take adventure into the wardrobe, shall we? Into Narnia. All right, guys, let's get into Narnia, shall we? So, on to book 1, The Magician's Nephew. Now, I know I can already hear you, because there's potentiality that there's some diehard Chronicles of Narnia fans here, and they're screaming down at the phones or their speakers or cars, radios, or whatever they're listening to, say, no, you don't start with the Magician's Nephew. That's not the first book. That's not the Chronicle book. I know, I get it. I'm just going to explain how they're set out, because basically, what came first was The Lion, the Witch, of the Wardrobe, right? But as C.S. Lewis started to write his trilogy, he would write prequels in between. So the first book he wrote was The Lion, the Witch, of the Wardrobe, and then later on he wrote the Magician's Nephew, and he wrote The Silver Chair and The Last Battle, and The Horse and the Boy, and so on and so forth. But chronologically, when you set them in how the story is actually chronologically set out, they do start with The Magician's Nephew. So I understand that there are some diehard fans who've gone, no, you shouldn't start with that one. But in all honesty, and I'm going to put my hand up here, and I'm going to be a bit honest, I'm going to have a bit of a pushback here, that I didn't know this when I first started this series. When I first got the box set, I just went by numbers. So again, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7. And at number 1 was The Magician's Nephew. I wasn't to know that this wasn't the first book in the series. I just assumed that Disney had jumped ahead and just decided just to do Lion, Witch of the Wardrobe because it was more well known, but it was more an easier story to adapt, that sort of thing. But also, like, the BBC did a run of The Lion, Witch of the Wardrobe. I think it was like a TV movie back in the 70s or 80s, which I have seen. But we do have it on DVD, but I can't remember where it is. But that's a very very interesting take on the story. So I know there are going to be a lot of fans out there who say no, but I read the series as, The Magician's Nephew, Lion, the Witch of the Wardrobe, The Horse and the Boy, Prince Caspian, Voyage of the Dawn Trader, The Silver Chair, then The Last Battle. That's how I read them, and I didn't feel lost. I didn't feel confused. If anything, I saw the birth of Narnia, and I saw the end of Narnia. You know what I mean? And I saw it properly, instead of jumping around and reading books where they were sort of publication, not chronological. I wasn't confused, and I still enjoyed my time, and I think you would still enjoy your time as well if you read them how I'm going to basically lay them out now. So I just wanted to clear that up for any sort of diehard fans currently screaming into the ether. I can hear you, and I understand where you're coming from, but at the same stage, book 1 to me, as I read them, starts with The Magician's Nephew, and that's just the way it is. It's my podcast, simple. Anyway, so book 1 is The Magician's Nephew. Let me read you from the back of the blurb. It goes, The Magician's Nephew. The adventure begins. On a daring quest to save a life, 2 friends are hurled into another world where an evil sorceress seeks to enslave them, but then the Lion Aslan song waves itself into the fabric of a new land, a land that will be known as Narnia, and in Narnia all things are possible. Book 1 of 7 in the classic series by C.S. Lewis. This book, like I mentioned, I know a lot of people, they read it later on, they don't read it at the beginning, but I would say this is a good introduction to Narnia. The reason I say that is because it's in this book that you meet Jadis. Jadis is the name of the character who will later become the White Witch. And I will get into that in a minute, but you meet Jadis, you meet Aslan for the first time. You actually get to, before you actually even meet Aslan, you get to actually see the creation of Narnia. You actually get to experience how Narnia was created. You also get an understanding of the old, in Lion Witch the Wardrobe, there's an old man, because obviously Lion Witch the Wardrobe was set during the Blitz, set during World War II, and the Percival children are sent to this man's house to basically stay there from the bombs that hit in London. And it turns out that that old man is the little boy in this book, and that him and his best friend, whose name who's Diggory, and the girl's name is, oh god, see, it's been long. It's been since I've read this book. Actually, I'm currently flicking through the pages. Polly, Diggory, and Polly. The little boy Diggory um, gets hold of a magic ring. Well, basically, I think it's his uncle has a magic ring, and he's old fairy magic, and basically tests this ring out on the boy and Polly. Now, the way these rings work is that if you touch this ring, it will take you to the wood between worlds, and the wood between worlds is the best way I can explain it is if you have an option, if you have the ability, if you're driving, don't do this, but if you have the ability, right, get yourself a piece of paper. Doesn't matter how big it is, a pen or pencil would do. Um, and draw exactly what I tell you to draw. Right? I'm going to draw it as well at the same time with you. All right. So in the middle of this piece of paper, I want you to draw a straight line. Right. Then underneath that line, I want you to draw 3 circles. So start on the far edge of the line, draw a third circle there. Make sure the top of that circle is touching the bottom of the line. And then the middle circle, again, make sure that is touching the circle that's on your left or the right, whichever side you started. And then the final circle, again, making sure each one of them is touching the line and then touching each other. There's no overlap, just make sure they're touching, right? Now, above that line, I want you to draw an upside down V, a mountain, right? Now, what you should have in front of you is a line, a mountain, and 3 balls underneath, right? This is how I try my best to kind of explain it to you, right? So that line in the middle is the wood between worlds. It is the bridge to, it's kind of the multiverse. It's the bridge to other universes. It's the bridge to other worlds. It's the bridge to other different dimensions, right? And then above the woods, the mountain is Aslan country. It's where Aslan comes from. It's Aslan's homeland, or you can call it heaven if you want to. But that's Aslan country. Underneath the balls are a representation of the different dimensions, because the way that C.S. Lewis used the way to explain this was use of a form of a wood, and the wood between worlds, if you was to look at it, it would look like a marshland. Every few meters there are little pools of water. Each one of those pools of water will, if you got into it, would take you to another world, would take you to another universe. And this is kind of how the story goes on. And within doing so, they ended up when they touch this ring, because it has fairy magic, it has the ability to take them to this location. And Polly and Diggory go there, and they end up falling into a portal, and they find themselves in a world that has, this is where it gets a bit fanciful. Again, it goes quite deep. They find themselves in a world that has been destroyed. All life has been killed, and they walk around. It's like walking around on Mars. It's just desolate. It's completely barren. And they find their way to a ruined city. And as they explore this city, they find this castle. And in this castle, there is loads of people just set in stone. And at the very end is, I think, if I remember correctly, I think it's a bell, and there's a lady sitting there, and I think it was Diggory. He rings the bell, and it ends up breaking a spell. And the woman that's sitting on the chair, she's a giant. She wakes up, and she basically questions the children: "Who are you? What are you doing here? Where are you from?" And it turns out that Jadis, basically through self-infliction, she went to war with her sister, and she used magic in her world. Her world was full of magic, and there were a lot of magic users. And there was this one magic spell, this one word that, if uttered, would destroy all life in the world. And as she was losing the war to her sister came to her and basically said, "You have lost. I am taking over now. This is, my kingdom." And Jadis, with a smile on her face, looks at her sister, says the word, and kills everybody. But before she does that, she does an enchantment on herself where she freezes herself in time so that she um, isn't affected by the spell. So she utters the words, everybody dies, she sits down, she freezes in time, and it's the bell once rung. Because then again, there are some sort of conflictions. The fact of, well, if everybody's dead in her world, in her universe, who would ever ring her bell to wake her up? I guess there is a bit kind of conflictions there. But the fanciful side behind it is that, you could at least break it down, being say she always knew that somebody would come eventually and wake her up. But again, this is the White Witch we're talking about. This is Jadis. She might be a queen, but she's still a child. She's very childish, and basically the children try to escape from her, try to leave from her, but she ends up holding on to them and getting pulled into the wood between worlds. And then she gets pulled as they try to escape, because they were worried that how they would find their way back home. So what they decided to do is that they decided to pull up some turf next to the pool that they was their home, is that it was where they climbed out of, is where how to get back to Earth, how to get back to our universe. They ended up leading Jadis back to Earth. When she gets to Earth, she realizes that Earth isn't like her planet, and that even though she's a giant, magic doesn't work here. Magic sadly doesn't apply to Earth, apply to our universe. So she tries to utter the words, and it doesn't work. People aren't dying, people aren't falling. Magic is not working. And Diggory and Polly basically find. I won't. There is a bit more story to it, but they ended up finding their way into this world that is barren, is blank. It's just like a blank world. It's just a void. There's nothing there, and then all of a sudden, out of the view, things start to grow. A sunset starts to come over. A big lion is seen, and he breathes air into the world, and plants and trees and forests and animals start to appear, and he brings gifts. And then once the land is done, Jadis tries to attack him, but it doesn't work. And that the pole that she holds a pole from an old fashioned lamp, and that lamp breaks off, and all that's left is a handle, and the handle buries itself into the ground, and like a tree grows a lamp, and forever burning will be known as the land of the lamp. And this is where the beginning of Narnia started. And from there, he bestows life and gifts onto because Jadis, the White Witch, she was riding a horse when she entered Narnia for the first time. And this horse that she brought back from Earth, who was just a carriage horse, basically is given the gift of life, but also given the gift of wings, so that he can now talk, he can now communicate, speak English, as you say, and fly. So he's now free from his bonds of servitude. He is now free to um, live, really. And if I remember correctly, there was a man and a woman. I think they become the first man, Adam and Eve. They become the first human life in Narnia, and all the other animals are free to do this land. And the story goes on, like that's the base of this. There's more to it about Jadis going into Aslan's garden and eating the apples again, the apple of Eden and all that, and her being infected by it, her being corrupted by the apple, and that the apple was actually meant for somebody else, and that if taken, if you only take one, and that if you get permission from Aslan, if you enter the gates, if you, instead of climbing over the walls of the gates, if you enter Aslan's garden through the front gate, and you only take one, and you're not greedy, then the apple will work. The apple will give you rejuvenated life, will bring you back from death. But if you climb over the wall like Jadis did, and you eat the fruit from the trees, you will never crave food again. You'll never want for nothing again. You'll always be cursed. Kind of a Harry Potter with, if you ever killed a unicorn and drunk its blood, that you'd live a cursed life. You'd live forever, but like you wouldn't be living. It would just be existing. It would just be horrible. So there is a bit more to the magician's nephew, But for me, reading that book for the first time, it really showed me that this series is a lot deeper than I thought. The whole sort of multiverse, multi dimensions, and that there's loads of different worlds out there. You know, you have to think of it, the wood between the worlds, as a giant marshland. That's the best how I imagined it. Would be trees everywhere that are drinking this life force out of these pools, who are growing from it. But the wood between worlds is not a place for life. It's not a place for people, for anything to live. The wood between worlds is, it's like a nexus point. It's a point between Aslan's country and all the other different realities, different worlds, different dimensions, and that it's not for living, because when you're there, you have the sense of confusion, of loss, of a sense of not being that. Even though it's amazing to be there, you're not meant to be there. You're not meant to exist there, because it's not part of anything. It's there, but it isn't there. Again, it's very high science fiction. It's very very weird, but it's one of those where it's like you're there, but you're not meant to be there. You're meant to be in one of those pools, and that there's so many pools. The world isn't ever infinite wood of pools, because there's ever different endless possibilities of dimensions and universes and so on. If you've watched Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, you'll understand it there. But that's the kind of the way it works, and this was being done years and decades ago, before it was really sort of considered as a scientific thing. Now it was just seen as a conceptual thing. um and for me, reading this book for the first time, it opened my eyes to not just the characters and the world that C.S. Lewis is trying to create here, but I got to see the creation of Narnia. I got to meet Aslan for the first time, and I actually felt like he was talking to me as he was talking to Diggory and Polly. I felt like he was talking to me as well. Like I was part of this journey. I was a part of Narnia's creation. I got to see Narnia be formed, be created. So when I actually went into Lion of the Witch of the Wardrobe, I knew where I was. It felt so familiar because I'd already been there. Time had passed, and tons of things had happened by that time. But for me, it was just mere moments. It made the world feel real. It made me feel like I was a time traveler. How I was there at the beginning, and for the rest of the world, when I left, it was hundreds of years, centuries had passed. But for me, it was only a moment. So when I jump into line went to the wardrobe, it's like wearing a pair of, an old coat or a pair of old shoes. It's very familiar. It's very homely. You know what I mean? It felt very same. It felt comfortable. It felt like home. And I think that is a very beautiful feeling. Now I'm going to read you one of my favorite passages. I did look into it. Legally, I'm not allowed to sit and read the whole book, because it's not in public domain, and that the way these books are, story wise, is the fact of they're still owned by the C.S. Lewis estate, meaning that I can't one for one read the whole book to you. I would do. I was actually thinking about it. I did look into it, but that's not something that I can do legally. But what I can do is I can read passages and quotes and stuff like that. So I am allowed to do that. Because a lot of people said to me, Luke, you've got a very soothing voice. You'd be really good as to reading audiobooks. I had thought about it, and I might look into it next year. But for now, we're just going to have to deal with me reading passages from the book. So before I start, I want to do a quick chug of water to really sort of cleanse the palate. Right. So, chapter 3, The Wood Between the Worlds. Uncle Andrew and his study vanished instantly. Then, for a moment, everything became muddled. The next thing Diggory knew was that there was a soft green light coming down on him from above, and darkness below. He didn't seem to be standing on anything, or sitting, or lying. Nothing appeared to be touching him. I believe I'm in water, said Diggory, or under water. This frightened him for a second, but almost at once he could feel that he was rushing upwards. Then his head suddenly came out into the air, and he found himself scrambling ashore, out onto the smooth grassy ground at the edge of the pool. As he rose to his feet, he noticed that he was neither dripping nor panting for breath, as anyone would expect after being under water. His clothes were perfectly dry. He was standing by the edge of a small pool, not more than 10 feet from side to side, in a wood. The trees grew close together and were so leafy that he could get no glimpse of the sky. All the light was green light that came through the leaves, but there must have been a very strong sun overhead, for this green daylight was bright and warm. It was the quietest wood you could possibly imagine. There were no birds, no insects, no animals, and no wind. You could almost feel the trees growing. The pool had just got out of was not the only pool. There were dozens of others, a pool every few yards, as far as his eyes could reach. You could almost feel the trees drinking the water up from their roots. This wood was very much alive. When he tried to describe it afterwards, Diggory always said it was a rich place, as rich as a plum cake. And that is one of my favourite passages from this book, because it just gives you the um, real sort of introduction that this is more than what more that you bargained for. You know, that he is somewhere where he shouldn't be. That it feels weird that he surrounded like he was submerged in water, but he wasn't drowning. He wasn't wet. He'd basically teleported. He'd travelled from one universe to another, using these magic rings. And I just feel like it's just a really good introduction to Narnia. Now, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I understand there's going to be a lot of people, a lot of really hardcore fans who think, no, this is not where you start. You start Lion with the Wardrobe. I understand that, but trust me, if you start with the Magician's Nephew, like me, you'll get an understanding of not just Aslan, not just of Narnia, or even of the White Witch. You just get an understanding that this world, and not just this world, but the universe and tons of universes are ever existence, ever present, and that Narnia is just one of those worlds, one of many worlds. Maybe if you looked into one of them pools, you could look and find Middle Earth. Or if you look into another one of them pools, you might find, another one of your favorite books or one of your favorite movies or games or whatever. These are all different realities. These are all different possibilities. Um, it just explores the idea of who Aslan is, who Narnia is, and what C.S. Lewis was trying to convey in his books. Um, and again, you can't beat being there at the creation of everything. If once you see everything be created, it hurts more when you get to see it all end at the very last book. But we'll get to the last book when we get there. But for now, that was The Magician's Nephew. So on to the next one, which is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So, time for book 2, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. On the back it says, they open a door and enter a magical world. 4 adventurers step through a wardrobe door and into the land of Narnia, a world enslaved by the power of the White Witch, with almost all hope is lost. The return of the great lion, Aslan, signals a great change and a great sacrifice. Doesn't that just get you interesting? Don't that just pull you in to the story? The story of the Percival children, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. So I told you I knew the other one. I didn't just quickly write it down so I'd remember. But the Percival children, 2 sons of Adam, 2 daughters of Eve. Everybody knows the story of The Lion, Witch, of the Wardrobe. If you haven't watched the Disney movie, you're most likely somewhat familiar with. If you're a lot older being, then you might be familiar with the original BBC TV movie that came out, I think, the 70s or 80s. But if you're a young being like me, you probably grew up with the Disney versions of the films, so everybody knows The Lion, Witch, of the Wardrobe. But to give you a basic sort of introduction to the story, the Percival children, Lucy, Susan, Peter, and Edmund, they live in London during the Blitz during World War II. They are shipped off to the countryside where it's safe, away from the bombs. While playing a game of hide and seek, Lucy finds herself going into an empty room just full of a wardrobe. She goes inside the wardrobe, and next thing you know, she's inside Narnia, where she meets Mr. Tomless. Edmund goes there as well after Lucy does. He ends up meeting the White Witch. And then all the other Percival children get there, find out that they are 2 sons of Adam, 2 daughters of Eve, and that they must help save the world of Narnia from the White Witch, because there was a prophecy made that 2 daughters of Eve and 2 sons of Adam will return to the world of Narnia and will basically reclaim it for Aslan. So the White Witch has been fearful of this forever, that if anybody ever is to meet a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve, to let her know straight away so that she can deal with them and basically kill them, get rid of them, so that she won't be overthrown. Um, Obviously, the White Witch, if you've read the Magician's Nephew, you know who the White Witch is. The White Witch is Jadis, and that she has basically learned the magic of Narnia, where she basically the magic from her world didn't work. Her magic of her world only works where she's from, her world, and that Narnia is new, but she's had enough time to learn the magic of Narnia and how to change the weather and basically have a continuous 100 years winter, no Christmas, which is so bad. Like, no Christmas, no Santa. Even Santa's not even allowed in Narnia because he's not allowed to come in and spread his love and joy with everybody else and his gifts and all that jazz. She's banned him, so he's not even allowed in Narnia, which is absolutely criminal if you ask me, letting Santa in, because we all know Santa's real and this proves it. But that being said, the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, Witch, the Wardrobe, it's a fantastic book. It has so many different messages in it. It you have the battle at the end, which is a fantastic thing, which really really well done in the movies, which I can't wait to get around to the films because that's going to be a fun part to talk about. But the Lion, Witch of the Wardrobe, I understand why a lot of people start with it. Again, Magician's Nephew, it came a lot later, publication wise, when it was written. The first book was The Lion, Witch of the Wardrobe. That was the first Narnia book written, so that you wasn't to know who the White Witch was. The White Witch was just a new sort of entity, a new character, new players enter the game, that sort of thing. But obviously, if you read The Magician's Nephew, you know who she is, you know what she's capable of, you know how dangerous she is. And this is why I say that you should start with The Magician's Nephew, because it helps as you go on with the series to really get an idea of where the world is, what the feeling of how it feels, and also how the people of Narnia have changed. They're again, because you might be gone for, a couple minutes or a day or two or whatever, and however long it takes you to get from one book to the next. But for the Narnians, it's hundreds of thousands of years at times. Time passes and very, very quickly. And it kind of shows you again that sort of how time passes, where you put a book down, and the reason books are heavy is because they hold worlds inside them, and the heavier book, the more heavier the world is. Granted, that doesn't really work much for the Chronicles of Narnia because the books are only short and they're not that heavy, but if you put them all into a giant omnibus, a giant tome of a book, then it'd be pretty heavy because that world is just jam-packed and huge. But it just shows the passage of time. But it's a wonderful Christmas book. I would say it's a good book to read at Christmas. Definitely, not just for the whole long 100 years winter when you do get to meet Santa, but generally I just think it's a lovely book, and obviously you get to meet Aslan properly. You get to have a proper talk with Aslan. You get to learn as Aslan is you kind of learn at this point on, as the books go on, you learn that Aslan isn't good or bad. That Aslan means well, but he's not a good person, and he's not a bad person. He's good neutral. You know what I mean? They, them. Aslan is not a person or thing. He's not even a lion. He's just perceived as a lion. Aslan if anything, Aslan's a concept. Again, you can kind of see the Christianity roots in the whole kind of story. That the whole sort of Aslan is God, that sort of thing. That he's ever present, he's ever there, ever watching. They're ever watching. They're always there. But that when you need them, when you need Aslan, they will be there to help you. But sometimes it's down for you having to figure out for yourself. Like, he won't give you the answer. Sometimes you know what the answer is. You just gotta figure it out for yourself. Obviously, I won't get into the religious side of Chronicles of Narnia, because again, that'd be its own sort of book in its own. But I'm going to read you some passages, two passages from this book that I really really like. The first passage is going to be when Lucy first experiences Narnia, when she first walks into Narnia. So it goes something like this. It goes, the next moment, she found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. Why is it that just like branches of trees? Exclaimed Lucy, and then she saw that there was a light ahead of her. not a few inches away where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off, something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at night time, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe, and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it is a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be still daylight there. I can always get back if anything goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow and through the wood towards the other light. In about 10 minutes she reached it and found it was a lamppost. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamppost in the middle of a wood, and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming towards her, and soon after that a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist upwards he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat. The hair on them were glossy black, and instead of feet he had goat's hoofs. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice this at first, because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella, so as to keep it from tailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with a short pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there stuck two horns, and one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I had said, held the umbrella. In the other hand he carried several brown paper parcels. What with the parcels and the snow, it looked just as if he had been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a faun, and when he saw Lucy he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all of his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the faun. So that was the first introduction to meeting Thomas. That's the first introduction of Lucy's introduction to the world of Narnia, to being, I think, in the books it doesn't convey it so well. It's not until you watch the first movie, the Disney movie, that you actually really understand the feeling of a child. Because I'll mention it when I get around to reviewing the film, but I do want to mention it here. When they filmed that scene in the film, they didn't show the little girl, the set. They didn't show anything. None of that. Genuinely, they left it a complete surprise to her, so that when she turned around, she looked around, the genuine real expression she has on her face is a real genuine expression of amazement, of wonder, that childlike sort of, like, again, wonder but disbelief of, like, this is real, this is all looks amazing, looks incredible. You can't get a shot like that. You can't get a true emotion like that unless it's real. And so that's a little bit of trivia for you, that they didn't show the little girl the room when they opened it. When you first see it, she first sees it, and that's something that the book doesn't convey. But I love that passage, because it really starts to give you, again, if you haven't read The Magician's Nephew, you're not to know this world. This land is new to you. You instantly feel like you're no longer in Kansas anymore. You know what I mean? You're no longer in our world. That instantly, in a flick of a few words, you are now transported to another world, another dimension, a world of snow and lampposts and woods and thorns and magic, and that you know that what's going to happen next is going to be absolutely wonderful. And I feel like, for me, that's what I love so much about that passage. What I love so much about this book is that it's just the wonder. How when you first come into Narnia, you don't know anything. It's just a magical world of snow. And as a kid, that would feel so I want to say awe-inspiring, but just wonderful, just to experience it. The second passage I'm going to read is chapter 2. It's only going to be a bit, because it goes on for quite a bit, and I don't want to sort of read too much and get in trouble. Which, chapter 2, what Lucy found there. "Good evening," said Lucy. But the fawn was so busy picking up its parcels that at first it did not reply. When it had finished, it made her a little bow. Good evening, said the thorn. Excuse me, I don't want to be inquisitive, but should I be right in thinking that you are a daughter of Eve? My name's Lucy, she said, not quite understanding him. But you are, forgive me, you are what they call a girl, said the thorn. Of course I am, said Lucy. You are, in fact, human. Of course I'm human, said Lucy, still a little puzzled. To be sure, said the thorn. How stupid of me, but I've never seen a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve before. I am delighted. This is to say, and then it stopped as if it had been going to say something and it had not intended but had remembered in time. Delighted, delighted. It went on. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tomness. I am very pleased to meet you, Mr. Tomness, said Lucy. And may I ask, oh, Lucy, daughter of Eve, said Mr. Tomness, how have you come into Narnia? Narnia? What's that? Said Lucy. This is the land of Narnia, said the thorn, where we are now. All that lies between the lamppost and the great castle of Carpavel on the eastern sea. And you have come from the wild woods of the west? I I got in through the wardrobe in the spare room, said Lucy. Ah, said Mr. Thomas in a rather melancholy voice. If only I worked harder at geography when I was a little thorn, I should no doubt know all about these strange countries. It is too late now. But they aren't countries at all, said Lucy, almost laughing. It's only just back there. At least, I'm not sure. It is summer there. Meanwhile, said Mr. Tomless, it is winter in Narnia, and has been for ever so long, and we shall both catch cold if we stand here talking in the snow. Daughter of Eve, from the far land of Spare Oom, with eternal summer reigns around the bright city of Wardrobe, how would it be if you came and had tea with me? Thank you very much, Mr. Tomness, said Lucy, but I was wondering whether I ought to be getting back. It's only just around the corner, said the thorn, and there'll be a roaring fire and toast and sardines and cake. Well, it's very kind of you, said Lucy, but I shan't be able to stay long. If you would take my arm, daughter of Eve, said Mr. Tomless, I shall be able to hold the umbrella over both of us. That's the way. Now, off we go. And so Lucy found herself walking through the wood arm in arm with this strange creature as if they had known one another all their lives. That's your first introduction to Mr. Tomless, and it's also your first sort of introduction to the whole idea of a daughter of Eve, the son of Adam, and what that is to mean, and that how the world works, and how this is the great lamppost, and the sort of what obviously you don't know why it's great, but you just know this is the great lamppost, and you knew that something that was weird and odd and different. Like, why is there a lamppost in the middle of a wood? But it's the great lamppost. There's obviously something is behind this. There is a story that I need to figure out. Again, you figure out why it's called the great lamppost in The Magician's Nephew, whereas in this book you wouldn't be to know. Again, it's very much the fact of I'm very gripey the fact that people don't class The Magician's Nephew as the beginning. I do, and I think it helps you very much understand the world and where you are. But I understand where people are coming from as well, being like, no, this is the first book that was published, that's why that's how you should read it. I understand that, but tomato, you know what I mean. But the Lion Witch of the Wardrobe is definitely an introduction. It is, it being the first book in the series, is a very much an introduction to the world of Narnia. And as the story goes on, and as the characters learn of who they are, you learn at the same time. You learn the whole relevance behind the whole daughter of Eve, son of Adam, and it all starts to click there. And that, you know, Peter is to be the next king, and that Peter, as well as being the oldest child, but also being the oldest, need to be the protector, is going to be the king, and that Susan is going to be a queen, so she needs to be, um, again, because she's being the oldest, she's got to be, again, like, she's got to help Peter lead to control Edmund and Susan. I mean, Edmund and Lucy, who are very young, especially Lucy. She's very, very young. And well, Edmund learns a thing, a lesson as well when he deals with the White Witch, that what he's done is wrong, and that he should listen to his brother, he should listen to his sister, and that he should be kinder to Lucy. He shouldn't pick on her and make fun of her. basically he's the youngest brother, one of the youngest brother, and that he basically wants to be seen, he wants to be heard, but he also doesn't, again because he's young, he doesn't want to be told what to do, and he quickly learns the fact of, when I don't listen to those telling me what to do, I get myself into trouble and I make things worse. And he did, and he caused the death of Aslan for the hands of the White Queen, and but he redeems himself as the stories, as this story goes on, and as the other stories goes on. He does redeem himself, and he becomes a very good king. Um, but yes, so that's the Chronicles of Narnia: The Lion, Witch, of the Wardrobe, the first book, as most people class it, or the second book if you're like me and you class it as chronological, not publication. But it's a very good book. Highly recommend it. On to Horse and the Boy, now book 3. So on to book 3, The Horse and the Boy. Now this one I don't remember much about, to be honest. It's not that it wasn't a good story. It was just, the way I like to think of it is that it's a kind of a prequel sequel. The reason being is because this book is set after the events of Lion, Witch of the Wardrobe, but before Prince Caspian. It's set a few years after the events of Lion, Witch of the Wardrobe, before that book ends. Basically, before the end of Lion, Witch of the Wardrobe, if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. But before the end of Lion, Witch of the Wardrobe, Lucy, Edmund, Peter, and Susan grow up and become adults and kings and rulers in Narnia. And then one day they go hunt a white harp, which is like a deer, and they find themselves in a part of Narnia they haven't been in a very, very long time. They find themselves at the Great Lamppost, and they find themselves near the wardrobe, and they walk through the wardrobe. And as they come out of the wardrobe, they find themselves kids again. They find themselves back into their world, and that how many times they try to go back through the wardrobe, that their life there is now over, and then they disappear. And then after time passes and the Prince of Caspian starts. The Horse and the Boy takes place during where the Percival children are ruling over Narnia, where they are the kings and the queens, and that a great war is coming to Narnia, and that a little boy named Sash, I think his name is Sasha, and Bree are sent on a quest to go warn the Narnians that this oncoming war is coming, and that if they don't, that this whole land of Narnia will be put into strife again, put into war, and bad things will happen. So the little boy and the horse Bree are sent to kind of get ahead of them, and that the story is kind of their story, how they travel. Now, I'll be honest, I don't remember much about it, because it's been a while since I've read like this book. As I mentioned, the reason I don't remember a lot is because it has importance to the story, but it's not overly important, if you ask me. Like, it's important towards of if you want to know more about what happened during the reign of the Percival children when they were ruling over Narnia. If you want to know more about that and that time and what it was like, then this book is for you. But if you're just there in terms of the story, then you would skip this one and you'd go from Lion, Witch of the Wardrobe straight to Prince Caspian, because then Prince Caspian picks up where that book left off and carries on the story. So this is a very middle ground book. This is a very middle book. I have a friend of mine who really, really loves it. Actually, I haven't read you the back of the blurb yet, have I? A wild gallop for freedom. On a desperate journey, two runaways meet and join forces. Though they are only looking to escape their harsh lives, they soon find themselves at the centre of a terrible battle. It is a battle that will decide their fate and the fate of Narnia itself. I'm going to read you a passage from this book, because as I mentioned, I haven't got a lot to say about it. So this one's going to be quite short. So this is the passage, right? So to give you some context, because it is a middle of a passage. It's not at the beginning of a chapter like the other two. This one is at during the middle of chapter 10. Basically, up until this point, they're traveling along and they see this army, and they just know that this army is going to beat them to their end goal, so they ain't gonna have enough time to, what's the word I'm looking for, warn Narnians that this army is coming to battle them. Um, so they end up jumping onto Bree. Yeah, some words out. The boy and Bree. I mean, boy's name is Arvis. Um, jump onto Bree's back, and Bree runs, and that he gets chased by Aslan because he's not going fast enough, and that he was holding back, and that Aslan was chasing him and trying to scare him to make him think like run. You know, if you don't get any quicker, you're going to not be there in time, and all this would be for naught, for nothing. So I was going to give you some context, right? So it goes like this. Come on, Bree, come on, yelled Avarice over his shoulder. The race was very grueling for the horses as they toppled each other's ridge. As they topped each ridge, they found another valley and another ridge beyond it, and though they knew they were going in more or less the right direction, no one knew how far it was to Avad. From the top of the second ridge, Sasha looked back again. Instead of a dust cloud, well out in the desert, he now saw a black moving mass, rather like ants, on the far side of the bank of the winding arrow. They were doubtless looking for a ford. They're on the river, he yelled wildly. Quick, quick, yelled Avarice. We might as well not have been at all if we don't reach Avad in time. Gallop, Bree, gallop. Remember, you're a warhorse. It was all Sasha can do to prevent himself from shouting out similar instructions, but he thought, the poor chap's doing all he can already, and he held his tongue, and certainly both horses were doing, if not all they could, all they thought they could, which is not quite the same thing. Brea caught up with Howen, and they thundered side by side over the turf. It didn't look as if Howen could possibly keep it up much longer. At that moment, everyone's feelings were completely altered by a sound from behind. It was not the sound they had been expecting to hear, the noise of hoofs and jingling armor mixed perhaps with columnar battle cries. Yet Sasha knew it all at once. It was the same snarling roar he had heard that moonlight night when they first met. Avarice and Hugh and Bree knew it too. His eyes gleamed red and his ears lay flat back on his skull, and Bree now discovered that he had not really been going as fast, not quite as fast as he could. Sasha felt the change at once. Now they were really going all out. In a few seconds, they were all well ahead of Hewin. It's not far, thought Sasha. I did think we'd be safe from lions here. He looked over his shoulder. Everything was only too clear. A huge, tawny creature, its body low to the ground like a cat, slinking across the lawn to a tree. When a strange dog has got into the garden, was behind them, and it was nearer every second and half second. He looked forward again and saw something which he did not take in or even think about. This way was barred by a smooth green wall about 10 feet high. In the middle of the wall there was a gate. Open in the middle of the gateway stood a tall man dressed down to his bare feet in a robe coloured like autumn leaves. Leaning on a straight staff, his beard fell almost to his knees. So, to give you a bit of context to this moment, they're trying to beat this army to the arrow, to the crossing, and that they're not going fast enough. So Aslan appears to basically attack, to chase the horses and the boy. Because if I just, as I was reading that, I remembered there's at this point in the story there's two horses, and that you got Sasha the boy, Bree, and Howin, Hwin. Howin. I always struggle when I read out loud. I do apologise, it's my dyslexia. So if any times I make a mistake, that's it. But Aslan appears, and again he appears through all these books, but he doesn't. This is what I mean. When Aslan's not neither good nor bad. He is more so just he is there to help you gain your goal. Whatever that goal may be. Whereas this one, he needs you to get to that location as fast as possible to save the day. You're not going fast enough. You're holding back, and he shows up as a cat, as a lion, to basically attack you. To be like, look, move. I'm going to chase you. I'm going to try and claw at you. I'm going to try to, stab. Literally get my claws into it, eat you. run. And obviously they don't know it's Aslan, they just think it's a lion. So of course they hustle their bustle, and they get there in time and save the day. But it's one of those sort of things where, is Aslan good? Is Aslan bad? And that's the question that I have, and I still have really, which you get as you read through this trilogy, is the fact of the things that there are times where Aslan, you'd say, oh yeah, Aslan's a good person. Then you'd hear that Aslan isn't good, or Aslan doesn't help when he should help, or Aslan appears when he's most needed, and he doesn't appear when he's most needed. It's like he chooses when he shows up, and he chooses when to help. And sometimes he would rather leave you in confusion than help, because he knows that you'll always figure it out, but you just need to learn that yourself, and it doesn't always feel fair. But again, what is fair? Again, it's these questions that seem to appear all the time through this series. But that was The Horse and the Boy. As I mentioned, there's not much to say about it because I don't remember much of the story. But I would say, in terms of the actual story, it's more of a sort of a deep. It's a good story in its own, but in terms of how it links into the rest of the Narnia sort of story, it's more of a kind of continuation, backstory to what happened in the events when the Purcell children were ruling Narnia, and that you'd go back to the Lion, Witch, the Wardrobe till the end chapter where they're chasing the thorn, not thorn, the harp, the stag, whatever, through the woods, and they find themselves back to the lamppost, and they find themselves back into the real world. So that's kind of how it interacts, how it's interwoven there. It's a good book. If you love horses, it's fantastic, especially talking horses. But yeah, I don't have much to say about it really, so I'm going to move on because I don't want to sit here rambling and trying to find things to say, even though I don't. So on to the next one, which is Chronicles Narnia, Prince Caspian. Howdy, folks. I know you're probably expecting me to talk about Prince Caspian now, but as I was recording all of these different books and putting them into this, I realised that it was going to be a very, very long episode. So what I figured I would do, I'm going to be releasing this one sometime this week. So hopefully you'll be listening to this one on the either Thursday or Friday, and that the part 2 will be coming out Saturday, Sunday, depending on what day I decided to release this one at. But yeah, I decided to split up into 2 parts because otherwise we'd be here for ages and this one video would be too long. And also I didn't want to leave it as well, like do one episode one week and then do an episode another week, because that messes up the flow of all the other episodes I've got coming up. So it's going to be a 2-parter. You just listen to part 1. Hopefully part 2 will be out either tomorrow or the day after of you hearing this for the first time. If you listen to this in the future, most likely that part 2 is already out, so go listen to that now. But if you listen to this in the present time, part 2 will be coming very, very soon. And yeah, I hope to see you in part 2. I will see you in a minute.